Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you lost, even though you said everything you needed to? You tried to be clear, to be calm, to explain. But somehow, their interruptions, their tone, left you feeling smaller. And maybe deep down, you wondered, did I seem weak for staying silent? In a world that rewards volume and dominance, we're taught that silence means surrender. That if you don't fight back, you've already lost. But Nietzsche saw something different. Silence is not the absence of power, he implied. It's the refusal to play their game. Because true strength doesn't always shout. It doesn't explain. It waits. It watches. And when the moment is right, it doesn't need to prove anything. Its presence is enough, because power doesn't beg to be noticed. It just is. Maybe your silence isn't weakness. Maybe it's your greatest advantage. This isn't about winning arguments. It's about mastering yourself, because the one who doesn't react controls the pace. And from there, everything changes. Let's begin. Part 1. The urge to respond is an ego trap. Have you ever felt the burning need to respond? Not because it's helpful, but because staying silent felt like losing. Someone says something unfair, incorrect, or arrogant, and you feel that rise in your chest. I have to say something. But what if that urge isn't strength? What if it's the opposite? Nietzsche wrote, "The need to be right is a sign of weakness." Because when your identity depends on being right, you're already out of control. You're already in their game, and you've already lost the one thing that matters most, your center. This is what Nietzsche called herd morality. The morality of the crowd, where people do what's expected, because they're afraid of being judged. You speak not from conviction, but from a hunger to be validated. As good, as smart, as strong, as acceptable. But true power doesn't crave recognition. It doesn't chase approval. It simply is. Look at how this shows up in daily life. On social media, you scroll past a bad opinion, and something in you reacts. I can't let that go unchecked. You reply, argue, explain, not to understand, but to be seen. This is ego. It wants control. It wants to win. It wants to be right, loudly. But ego is also insecure. It panics when it's ignored. It flinches when misunderstood. And that's the trap. You're not speaking for the truth. You're speaking to survive. And when you do that, you become predictable, controllable, a puppet for anyone who knows how to pull your emotional strings. The superior individual, what Nietzsche called the higher spirit, doesn't react like this. They don't defend themselves to be liked. They don't explain themselves to be accepted. They don't justify to be understood. They stand still. They observe. And when they speak, if they speak, it's deliberate, powerful, and rare. So next time someone tries to provoke you, don't ask, "How do I win this?" Ask, "Why do I feel the need to respond?" Because once you no longer need to respond, you're no longer caught in the game. You've risen above it. And now, you're the one in control. That's the shift Nietzsche points us toward. From reacting to everything, to becoming untouchable through silence. Next, we explore how that silence becomes presence, and how presence, when mastered, becomes your most intimidating weapon. Part 2. Übermensch, presence without words. Nietzsche never imagined greatness as loud. He never described the highest human, the Übermensch, as someone who debated on every stage, won every argument, or dominated with words. On the contrary, The Übermensch rarely speaks at all. He doesn't need to. His presence speaks for him. Because when you've mastered yourself, you no longer seek to control others with noise. You influence them through stillness. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot remain silent cannot be trusted with truth." The Übermensch does not argue. He does not chase respect. He does not explain his value. He simply exists in such a way that others feel it, whether they understand it or not. His silence is not empty. It is a wall. And on the other side, others begin to crumble. Because they don't know what's behind it. They talk more. They fill the void with insecurity. They reveal themselves. And all he does is watch. Let's break this down. There are 4 types of silence the Übermensch uses as power. 1. Silence as refusal. The world often pulls you into noise, debates, distractions, drama. But the Übermensch doesn't participate. His silence is not weakness. It's a refusal to play in broken systems, a quiet no to cheap games of ego. When everyone else fights to be heard, he wins by not needing the stage. 2. The gaze as language. He may not speak, but he looks, and when he does, it cuts deeper than words ever could. Why? Because his gaze is free of fear, free of need. It holds no desperation to be liked or understood. That kind of attention unsettles people. It forces them to see themselves. And most can't bear what they see. 3. Stillness as power. While others fidget, justify, or react, the Übermensch holds his ground, physically and energetically. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't flinch. His stillness becomes the axis of the room. This isn't passivity. It's tension without collapse. It says, I am in control of myself, and therefore the environment. 4. Presence as psychological gravity. The Übermensch doesn't just enter a room. He shifts it. People speak more carefully around him. They rethink their words. They sense the weight of his silence and instinctively adjust their behavior. Why? They don't react. They don't justify. They don't beg for approval. That makes them unreadable, and therefore powerful. You cannot manipulate what you can't predict. The Übermensch doesn't use silence as a tactic. He is silence. And that's what makes it terrifying. Because in a world built on noise, on constant validation, on shallow performance, stillness is rebellion. And rebellion that doesn't shout is the kind they fear the most. But what is it about silence that makes people so uncomfortable? Why does presence, when it says nothing at all, rattle others to the core? That's what we explore next. The psychology behind why silence destabilizes everyone who can't find peace in their own mind. Part 3. Why silence makes people uncomfortable. There's something strangely powerful about not saying anything, not out of fear, not out of avoidance, but out of choice. Because silence is never just empty space. It's a mirror, and most people can't stand to look at what's reflected back. In confrontational or high-tension moments, when one person falls silent, the other often becomes more agitated. Why? Because silence removes the script. It creates uncertainty. And in that space of ambiguity, the mind starts panicking. Studies in social psychology show that during arguments or emotionally charged moments, if one party stops responding, the other experiences a surge of internal anxiety. They interpret the silence not as neutrality, but as judgment. Suddenly, their thoughts become louder. What are they thinking about me? Did I say something wrong? Why aren't they answering? Without the usual feedback, they lose control of the narrative. And that loss of control triggers psychological distress. Here's what's happening beneath the surface. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear, threat detection, and emotional memory, becomes highly active when social cues disappear. This is called social threat activation. Silence, in this context, is perceived as a withdrawal of emotional safety. In short, you didn't say anything, but their brain registered it as danger. This effect is magnified with certain personality types. Manipulators, for example, thrive on reaction. They feed off emotional responses. They provoke to get a rise out of you, because that gives them control over your behavior. But when you don't respond, when you stay calm and quiet, their entire tactic collapses. They start projecting, "Why isn't this working? Did they see through me? Am I losing control?" And in that uncertainty, they begin to expose themselves. They over-explain. They push harder. They spiral, because their power depended on your emotional cooperation. Silence also hits where it hurts most: the ego. The ego craves recognition, validation, even opposition. When you remove all of that, you deny the ego the stage it wants to perform on. Silence is a rejection without violence, a confrontation without effort. It tells the other person, "You are not important enough to disturb my peace." That, for many people, is unbearable. Here's the metaphor. Silence is a mirror, but not the kind that flatters. It's the kind that shows you what you've avoided for years. It shows people their own insecurity, neediness, and fragility. And most people aren't ready to face that reflection. That's why they call you cold, or passive-aggressive, or emotionally unavailable. When really, you've just stopped playing their game, because silence is only threatening to those who feel threatened by their own thoughts. So remember this: when you stay silent in tension, you are not just withholding words. You are shifting power. You are no longer reacting on their terms. You are forcing them to face themselves. And in that space, you gain control without lifting a finger. Next, we'll explore how to sharpen that control, how to turn silence from a mirror into a strategic weapon. Part 4: Strategic Weaponry, Turning Silence into Power. At this point, you already know silence is not emptiness. It's energy. It's presence. But used intentionally, it becomes something more: a weapon. Not to harm, but to disrupt, to expose, to reclaim control. Because in a world obsessed with reaction, those who remain still control the room. Here are the 4 strategic forms of silence Nietzsche would admire, each one a distinct blade in your arsenal. 1. Silence in the face of provocation. This is the moment when someone attacks your character, questions your intelligence, tries to bait you emotionally. Your instinct is to reply, to defend, to prove them wrong. But if you do, they've already won, because you've shown them what gets to you. Strategy: pause. Let their words hang in the air. Don't flinch. Don't explain. The silence that follows an insult is more piercing than any comeback. It says, "Your words are beneath my reaction." Use this when emotions rise, but your goal is to maintain dominance over the conversation and yourself. 2. Hunter's gaze. Silence as active observation. This is not passivity, it's predatory patience. While others ramble, justify, overshare, you watch. You listen not for content, but for contradictions, weaknesses, insecurity. Strategy: maintain steady eye contact. Lean slightly forward. Say nothing. Notice everything. Use this in negotiations, debates, or situations where power dynamics shift subtly. Let them reveal more than they intended, like a thief who talks too long and hands you the evidence. 3. The extended pause. Weaponizing time. Most people can't stand a pause. They rush to fill it, exposing their nerves. You don't. You extend the silence just a second longer than they expect. Strategy: after they ask a loaded question, pause. Let it breathe. Let them squirm. This silence creates psychological tension. It forces them to wonder, did I say too much? Are they judging me? Did I lose control? Use this when you want them to lose their rhythm and you want to reset the power balance. 4. Unpredictable silence. Becoming the unknown. The moment people can't predict you, they lose their advantage. Sometimes you speak. Sometimes you don't. They don't know when or why. That's terrifying, because people fear what they can't categorize. Strategies: switch your pattern. If you're known for being vocal, go quiet. If you're usually passive, interrupt once, but sharply, and then return to silence. This makes your presence magnetic. It keeps them guessing, cautious, reactive. Use this in group dynamics, team settings, or leadership moments when power needs to shift without words. And here's the key. Silence is not retreat. It is the trap you've set in plain sight. It's not about saying nothing. It's about choosing exactly when to say something, and when to let your silence do the damage for you. These tactics don't just protect your energy. They command attention. They unsettle arrogance. They bring the spotlight to you without you asking for it. But power is never without risk. Use these tools too often or too obviously, and they lose their edge. Use them strategically, and people won't just hear you when you speak. They'll listen differently because your silence has already done the work. Now, let's explore when silence is no longer power, but the prison someone else has placed around you. Part 5. When silence becomes a form of submission. We've talked about how silence can be powerful, how it can unsettle, dominate, and reclaim control. We've talked about silence as strength, but what if yours no longer feels powerful? What if silence no longer protects you, but slowly erases you? Nietzsche warned us about this kind of silence. Morality was invented by the weak to survive the strong. He called it slave morality, a value system built not from courage, but from fear, from compliance, from survival. When this mindset is applied to silence, it becomes dangerous, because silence, when misused, doesn't protect you. It erases you. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace, but really, you're slowly losing yourself. Bit by bit, day by day. Let's be clear, not all silence is noble. Sometimes silence is fear, wearing the mask of wisdom. Here are 3 signs that your silence has become a form of quiet self-erasure. 1. You avoid conflict to keep the peace. You feel tension rising in a conversation, but instead of speaking your truth, you smile. You nod. You say, "It's not worth it." But here's the hard truth. If you're constantly shrinking yourself to avoid friction, you're not preserving peace. You're suppressing you. Peace that costs your voice isn't peace. It's quiet control. 2. You give away space without noticing. You let others speak over you, decide for you, set the tone and pace, while you fade into the background. You begin every sentence with sorry. You avoid eye contact. You let them lead. Not because you trust them, but because you don't trust yourself. This isn't patience, it's passive conditioning. 3. You pride yourself on never making others uncomfortable. You think, at least I'm the calm one. I don't stir things up. But behind that identity is a fear of being disliked, rejected, or seen as too much. So you stay small, polite, agreeable, invisible. You've mistaken being agreeable for being virtuous. But virtue without boundaries is just self-erasure. Let's be honest. Some people in your life already know you won't push back. They count on it. Your silence becomes their license. And over time, they build power in the space you leave behind. You think you're avoiding conflict, but in reality they've built a system where they always win. And you never even enter the arena. Nietzsche didn't write for the agreeable. He wrote for the ones who feel this kind of silence and finally say, no more. Because true strength is not about noise, but it's also not about vanishing. It's about becoming the person who doesn't need to scream, but who refuses to be stepped on. If you've spent your life being the one who lets it go, who stays quiet to keep the calm, this is your wake-up call. You are not here to be managed. You're here to master your presence. And in the next part, we'll show you how. From silence as surrender to silence as rebirth. Part 6, Will to Power, Reconstructing Yourself Through Silence. Silence, at its highest form, is not about hiding. It's about becoming unshakable. For Nietzsche, the greatest power wasn't found in dominance over others, but in mastery over the self. He called this the will to power. Not brute control, but the ability to shape your identity from within, regardless of external chaos. And in this process of becoming, silence is not a retreat. It is reconstruction. A reset of your inner world, a tool for rebuilding strength from the inside out. To embody this, let's walk through 3 practices. Simple on the surface, but transformative in execution. 1. Pause before you react. This is where power begins. The next time someone provokes you, criticizes you, dismisses you, wait. Don't respond. Don't flinch. Don't justify. Just pause and hold the silence. This moment, however brief, shifts the entire power dynamic. Instead of being pulled into their frame, you stay rooted in yours. Your pause says, I am not here to prove. I am here to observe. 2. Let your gaze and presence speak. You don't need to speak loudly to command a room. Most people rush to fill silence because they're uncomfortable with presence. But when you learn to be still, to lock eyes without fear, to hold space with calm, you speak a language beyond words. Your body says, I am unmoved. I am aware. I am not here to entertain you. This quiet intensity unsettles people because it forces them to examine themselves. And often, that's more powerful than anything you could say. 3. Break silence with precision. Silence doesn't mean never speaking, but it means choosing carefully when you do. When you've taken the time to observe, to listen fully, to process, your words will carry weight. You don't speak to fill silence. You speak to cut through noise. A single sentence, spoken with full intent, can end a conversation more decisively than 100 scattered comebacks. This is discipline, not the kind that represses emotion, but the kind that filters it through strength and clarity. Together, these practices reshape the way you move through the world. You're no longer a reactor. You're no longer pulled into proving. You don't just walk into a room. You become a presence. Quiet, centered, and unmistakably felt. That is the will to power. It's not about being feared. It's about being so centered that nothing outside of you can drag you off course. So the next time someone pushes you, don't rush to respond. Pause. Let them fill the space. And when the time comes, speak with the force of someone who didn't need to speak at all. In the next section, we'll explore what this kind of inner authority looks like when you walk into the world with it, and how people begin to shift around you, even before you say a word. The silence of self-mastery. By now you understand. Silence is not the absence of power. It is the presence of someone who no longer needs to be explained. You've become quiet enough that others are finally forced to hear themselves. The silence of the weak hides from confrontation, but the silence of the strong? It holds the room. It shifts dynamics. It makes people rethink what they say and even why they say it. Nietzsche once wrote, "The weak want to be understood. The strong want to live truthfully." You don't owe the world your reactions. You don't have to prove your worth through volume. Your power is not in how loud you are, but in how little you're moved. So here's your choice. Will you keep defending your worth, or will you embody it? Comment below. I choose the silence that commands respect, not just for me, but to declare your shift to yourself. And don't stop here. The next video will take this further. It's not just about power. It's about unshakable presence. Let's build that together.